I'll read them off.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do an introduction to give the listener like a basic understanding of who you are. So just tell me about yourself. What was your name and where were you born?
My name is Frances Stevens, and my maiden name was Lavers, and I was born in Boston.
What year were you born in?
I was born in 1926.
Did you have any siblings growing up?
I did. I had two sisters and a brother.
Were you close to them?
I was very close to them, and to the rest of my family, my cousins and all that.
What was it like growing up for you?
It was great because I had great parents who were young parents, strict but good parents. We always ate a meal every night at the table. We never ever, well, in those days people didn't have all these things that they do today.
Yep.
We had no television. We were allowed to listen to certain things on the radio, of course, always music.
Yep.
And there was a cowboy program on, and we loved that. But during dinner, the radio was turned off, unless it was a music program, and we talked at the table. We weren't allowed to argue or fight with anybody. There isn't a lot of difference between us in age. My sister below me, I'm the oldest. My next sister was 2 years younger. My next sister was 3 years younger, and my brother, of course, was 5 years younger than me. Had a great life.
Yep.
We did well in school. We were friends with everybody in the neighborhood, and everybody helped everybody else out whenever there was a problem of any kind. We all pitched in together, and my parents all pitched in together and did things. My mother was the neighborhood sewer. Anyone needed a costume for a play or anything, my mother did it. And my mother and father had the same teachers in school as I did, which is most unusual. Usually your teacher will say, your brother would never do that, or your sister would never do that. And the rest of the kids would look at them and they say, your mother or father wouldn't do that. And then they'd say after school, what about your mother and father? Were they teachers? No, they were just young. Anything else?
Yep. So, that was during the Great Depression. Was there anything significant about that time period about your childhood?
No, because my father worked during the Depression, and he worked in a candy factory. He worked in Schreff's Candy in Charlestown. He was there for a good many years. So we were lucky. Daddy wasn't without work, so we did pretty well.
Yep.
But of course, when my mother found out that the lady next door, her husband was laid off, she would instead of just making enough dinner for us, like spaghetti and meatballs, she would make enough for a farm. She was just, that's the way we were brought up, and that's the way we've lived our life. We've helped our family if they've been in trouble for anything. When one of my nephews had a problem recently, and when he couldn't pay his rent, pay his mortgage, any one of us that could help helped. And when it was over, he said, "I'm going to pay all this back." And we said, "No, just pay it forward." That's how close we were as a family. When their children grew up, they would stay over people's houses. You wouldn't know who was the mother of the children and who was the aunt and the uncle. And it's still that way, although we're a lot older and they don't stay with us anymore.
Yep.
They're married, and they're raising their family the same way.
Okay. So I'm going to start talking about the initial impact of World War II. So can you tell me about your story, where you were on Pearl Harbor and what it was like?
I remember that when my dad, we were out playing, just the two of us, my sister and me, because the other two were a little too, a little young to be out around in the neighborhood. But my grandfather and grandmother just lived around the corner. And my dad went panicky. Where are my kids? Where are my kids? And I think we didn't even realize that we were responsible for Pearl Harbor, to take care of it. In those days, you didn't know who you owned and who you didn't own.
Yeah.
Who the government did. But we found out right away when we went back to school what it was like. And I can remember my grandfather saying, "Oh my goodness, another war," because he
lived
was in the
during
First
World War
World War.
One.
You know? So his children were in that.
Yeah.
Although my dad, um, during when the draft was in effect, and the draft was, I think you had to be 18 to go, but you had to sign up. You had to sign up immediately at your age. And when my dad signed up, he was a little older than that, and they said, he said, "I'm working now, and I have 4 children." He never went.
Okay.
I think they took those that could go at that time. My husband, he wanted to go, but he wasn't 18.
And he was your future husband, like.
Your future husband.
So
we were
what
not
was he at
married
the time of that?
Yeah, we were not married.
Just
at that
like
time.
lovers, kind of.
Yeah,
Okay.
he lived in Brookline, I lived in Boston. We met at a skating rink in Austin, Mass. So he couldn't go.
Okay.
He had to wait until he was still in high school, as a matter of fact. He had to wait until he was old enough to sign up. But believe you me, he signed up right away. He wanted to be a pilot.
Yep.
And the one thing he said to me when he trained and when he was ready to go into the war, he said, "I always wanted to be a pilot. It's terrible to reach what you want to do in life so early." He said, "Now I'm going to find something else." And he did find something else when he came out. He went to college. He was very smart. He got his degrees, and he went to work for a company while he was in college. Instead of letting the government pay for us, give us a salary to help us out, we moved in with his mother and father. Homes there weren't any. At that time, it wasn't too bad when we first got out, but it became to the point that actually it was hard to get an apartment. It was hard to buy a house because they weren't building anything at that time. All the people were in the service.
Yep.
So, we were going together. We weren't engaged at that point, but it wasn't long after that we got engaged.
Okay.
And we didn't get married until he came back from the war.
So besides your future husband, did any of your other loved ones go off to fight in like the wars, like your siblings or something? Did any of them do anything?
I had an uncle that went, but he wasn't in very long because when he was in, they found out he had diabetes. And they couldn't control it very well.
Okay.
But let's see, he was in. Uncle Everett was in. Uncle George was in. Uncle George was married. Uncle Everett was not. And but they were still, my Uncle Everett was still living at home. But he was only in for a very short time.
Okay.
And then my cousin, as I told you, my first cousin, who eventually years later came to live here with me, she went into the waves.
Oh.
Yeah, that was the one that went into the waves.
Okay. So like about Pearl Harbor again, you said like you guys, like the kids didn't really know about it or anything. Like
they told us that places were bombed. I was old enough to realize that all the men that were lost there when the ships went down. Most of our Pacific Fleet was at Pearl Harbor.
Yep.
And people talked about that a lot and wondered why.
It was all there at once.
Yeah, that it was all there, and so many people, lost their lives. And I do have numbers of people that lost their lives.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah. Okay, dear, let's go to the next one.
So like, what was once people found out it was like an American island, what was the mood around it? Was like, were they confident and wanted revenge, or were they like scared of what was next?
See, I was only 15, so I didn't really talk with the older people about it, like if you had someone who was 18 or 20, they probably talked about it. But we had very protective parents before that. But there were a lot of restrictions on us. At night, you had to pull all the blinds in your house.
Yeah.
You couldn't have a lot of light showing because a plane might fly over.
Oh.
A plane might get into the country. Since it started in Pearl Harbor, I would assume it would have, if there was going to be a bombing on the United States, it would be out in the West Coast. I would have assumed that.
So it was kind of like it kind of like a false sense of security, ever since
right.
that.
And there was a lot of restrictions.
Yep.
You had to be home early.
Like a curfew.
Yeah, you had a curfew. If you were out after school at the library, no matter what you were doing, the minute the lights went on outside for a little while, and a lot of places had to shut down their lights.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, places that had these bright lights shining on their buildings and things. You couldn't do that in those days. You had to be very careful of what light you could have allowed.
Yep.
You didn't play outside after it got dark. After the street lights went on, that was like whatever time it was. You didn't play outside.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your parents wouldn't let you out anyway.
Okay, so now I'm like gonna actually talk about the war now. So you kept talking about your husband in the war. What was like your reaction or feelings of him when he wanted to join and like when he was gonna join?
I was proud of him. We were just kids, going together. I was proud of him for wanting to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but sad that he was leaving.
Yeah. Were you kind of like nervous for him?
Yeah, I am, and it really affected me my whole life. If I don't know where my children are now, even though they're all grown up and even my daughter is retired and everything, if I don't know where my children are at night when I'm ready to shut down for the night, I worry about it.
Yeah. So
as a matter of fact, I just talked to my daughter, and we have the long weekend, and she said, Mom, why don't you come up here with us so you won't be home alone all night? You'll know that we're in.
Yeah. Well, weren't you talking about his mom? His mom didn't want him to join?
Oh, of course not. When he came back to tell his mother he was going to sign, she said, you can't go. And I think parents at that point could sign so you could go.
Yeah.
But he didn't have to sign up until I think it was 18.
Mm-hmm.
But he went in as soon as he could. He graduated from school, went in as soon as he could, and he stayed in until it was over. And we came out. We were one of the first to be allowed to get out if you wanted to because of the points. If you went out on a mission, you got so many points. If you was sent someplace for the night to man part of the buildings that you were protecting, you got points.
Mm-hmm.
So he had quite a few points. He was very ambitious, and he liked to be busy.
Yep. Okay.
Right up there, you can see he's still got his uniform on when we got married.
Oh.
And he's only 20.
Oh.
And no, he was at that point. He was 21, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
21, yeah. And I was 18. He was 20. Yeah.
So
after he got out, we got married.
Oh. So according to like the National World War II Museum, 38% of the servicemen and women were volunteers. I know your husband was one of them, but you said you listened to the radio. Like, was there a lot of propaganda and stuff on stuff like that?
No, because we really didn't listen to the radio as much as they do on television today. Because we'd come home after school, we'd have to do our homework.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'd sit down to dinner. Dinner was always at 5:30 because that's the time my dad got home and dinner was ready to go on the table. And we were probably at the table for an hour or two. We talked what went on at school, and my dad would tell us, because he worked at a candy factory, he would tell us about the new candies that they were thinking of producing.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother would say, don't forget a very small piece if you're going to come home, when they come home from school. We came home from school. My mother said, you only can have one small piece. And when I grew up and got married and had children, I said to my mother, gee, you were very smart to not give us a lot of candy. We went hyper all the time. She said, that had nothing to do with it. We didn't know about those things in those days. She said, we just wanted you to eat that meal that we put on your table. Probably most of the stuff was rationed anyway. So as young as she was very, very smart.
Okay. And then now talking more about you and like the women around you. Like we saw, according to history, we saw like many women fill the roles of men once they went back to the war. Like, did you notice anything special, like women going to the factories and stuff?
Well, I had two aunts that worked. They didn't. They weren't married at the time, and they didn't have children. My mother never went to work while we were growing up. So I didn't notice it so much, except when a woman was working in the neighborhood uh, right around us, and they'd say to my mother, "We have to work late tonight." They were building ships and all that
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
and we have to work late tonight. Any chance you could watch, you know, whatever the child's name was?
Yep.
And of course, that was the work my mother did. That's what she contributed because, and if she knew someone had, like I said, a husband had been laid off from his job and wasn't able to go into the service because of his health or something,
Mhm.
she always was watching out for them. And like I said, instead of making just one meal, she was making 3. But everybody helped everybody in those days, and everybody was frightened.
Mhm.
You know, could they come in? Could they bomb? I mean, after all, we bombed Europe
Yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff, and we bombed Japan and things like that. Why couldn't they get in to bomb us? Well, they did get in, didn't they?
Mhm.
When they did the Pearl Harbor thing.
So did you personally like kind of feel these gender roles kind of like well the woman's gender roles kind of changing with the
Oh yeah,
like were you happy about this? Were you
yeah, it didn't bother me much. I thought we were pretty smart. I mean, I got good marks in school. I was the class valedictorian.
Mhm.
I mean, we were pretty smart.
Yep.
Well, we had to be. These teachers were the same teachers my parents had.
Mhm.
And they would call, they would say, if you don't finish that, I'll call your mother. Because we brought our, lunch to school.
Okay. I'm just gonna check the time on this real quick and make sure everything's fine.